So just while I'm just moving a few things around in the background, Elizabeth, do you mind taking over and doing the intros and things?
That's fine. Are we on now?
We are.
Okay,
I think so.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to our participants today. We are delighted to have you for yet another session. As you join us, please let us know, use the chat box to let us know where you're joining from. And also please tell us what your role is and what you're looking forward to today. And also if you have a Twitter handle, share it with us so that we can follow you. I can see a number of participants already joining us. My name is Elizabeth Nyawade. I'm one of your facilitators today, and I'm joining today from Tooting Broadway in Southwest London. It's beautiful here today. The sun is shining, really nice weather. Let us know where you're joining us from and share with us your job role. And if you have a Twitter handle, also share that with us in the chat box. For those who've just joined us, my name is Elizabeth Nyawade, and I'm here to welcome you today. I'll be one of your facilitators. Please use the chat box to tell us who you are, where you're joining from today, and what you're hoping to share with participants today or to learn from today's session. In addition to that, please share with us your Twitter handle if you're on Twitter so that we can follow you and share the session today on Twitter. Thank you. A number of you are already using the chat box. Welcome to Maggie. Maggie from Hampshire, thank you. Hello to those who've just joined us. My name is Elizabeth. I'm one of your facilitators today. If you're just joining us at the moment, please share with us who you are using the chat box, where you're joining from today, your job role, and what you're hoping to learn today. I can see Faye. Welcome, Faye from Lancashire. Thank you. Welcome to Adam as well from NHS England. Zara from the Horizons team, welcome. Use the chat box and share with us where you're joining from today. And if you have a Twitter handle, share that with us as well so that we can follow you and share some of the sessions today on Twitter. Thank you. I also want to say hello to those who are joining us on YouTube. Welcome, we are delighted to have you and we're looking forward to sharing today's learning with you. Hello to those who've just joined us. My name is Elizabeth. I'm one of your facilitators today. As you join, please use the chat box. Share with us who you are and where you're joining from. Share with us your job role and what you're hoping to learn today. And if you have a Twitter handle, please share it with us as well. We'll be tweeting live the session today. Thank you. Welcome to Paula from Rotherham. Thank you. A number of you are already using the chat box. That is great. Welcome to Maggie. Maggie's enjoying the sun and the bird song. Thank you. Welcome to Cheryl from Guys and St. Thomas. Thank you.
Hi, Katie. Katie's a clinical psychologist from Liverpool University. Welcome. I think we're going to get a lot of psychologists on the line today. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Paula, Head of Improvement and Culture at Rotherham, Doncaster and South Humber Trust. Welcome. And Maggie enjoying the sun and the bird song. How lovely. I've been enjoying the bird song, but they do keep waking me up. We've got a love-hate relationship. So please do keep sharing in the chat box who you are, your role, and what you're hoping to learn today. We've got a couple of other things that are going on at the moment within the Wellbeing programme. We've got this community that we've got online, and the we'll put the link in the chat box. And this is a place where you can share all of the good stuff that you're doing, and people can comment on it, and you can ask questions on there. So if you're part of our newsletter, then which just like this, there's well over 1,000 people that are receiving the newsletter each week. Please do join the newsletter, and you'll find lots more about the Tribe platform on there, where you can connect with everybody after the session. So just before we start, please do say hello in the chat box. Who you are, where you are, your job role, what you're hoping to learn, and if you send it to all participants, we'll be able to see you there. I'm in Staffordshire today. I'm on the Staffordshire-Derbyshire border. The weather looks absolutely gorgeous. And I'm very, very much looking forward to this session. As you can imagine, I've seen the slides already, and I can't wait for you to see all of the content too. Hi, Lindsay, welcome. And we've got Sharon. You mustn't be too far from me, being at Staffordshire Combined Health. I think we probably know quite a few people there together. So welcome, everybody. We've got a lot of people joining us, and we'll have quite a few people on YouTube as well. So we've got Karen. Hi, Karen. It looks like it's sunny in Bristol too. So we've got a poll for you just before we start, but we'll give it a couple more minutes for a few more people to join us today, and we'll be running that on YouTube Live as well. So welcome. We've got Lisa with us as well. Hi, Lisa, clinical psychologist for Midlands Partnership Trust. It must be a Midlands thing today. There's a lot of us from the Midlands region, so welcome everybody. As I said before, I think there'll be a lot of psychologists joining us today. Just so you do know, we are live on YouTube as well as Zoom. All the information about these webinars can be found on the Horizons website, and we'll put that, I've just seen Louise has put that in the chat box, and we'll put that in the chat box in YouTube as well. So please do keep sharing your thoughts with us in the chat box. If you've got any colleagues that aren't able to join us live, all the recordings are available and all the slides are available for this session and all of the sessions on the website. So, Paul, I was just wondering if we could pop this poll up so that we can share this with everybody. So we've got a poll that's in progress at the moment on Zoom. If you are in YouTube with us, then please do answer in the chat box. So what is your main role in supporting the well-being of NHS people and or people in partner organisations? So is it health and well-being, occupational health, trade unions is number 3, number 4, OD, number 5, diversity and inclusion, number 6, psychologists, 7, workforce. And if you scroll down, you'll also be able to see 8 is line managers, leaders, non-exec, and 9 is coach, and then 10 is other. And if you're another, please do add to the chat box. So we'll just leave that running for a few more moments. Hi, Kathy, welcome from sunny Sheffield. We've got Liz joining us from Manchester, and we've just got a poll running at the moment, but I'm going to ask my colleague Paul if we could stop the poll just for a moment and let's have a look at the results. So we've got a nice breadth of colleagues across the board. So we've got people's main roles. I think the biggest there, got 24%, was OD. We've got quite a lot of clinical psychologists. We've got a lot of workforce as well. So welcome everybody. So welcome everybody to what I think is our 7th Wellbeing webinar, and we'd love you to continue sharing with us in the chat who you are and where you're from, what your job role is, and what you'd like to get out of the session today. I have a small technical hitch, but I'm just going to see if I can move the slides on. Here we are. So welcome everybody. Today's session is all about psychological support to maintain well-being and enhance recovery during and beyond COVID-19. We've got some fantastic speakers today, and I can't wait for all of this fantastic information to be shared with you because I've gained a lot from it already. The aims of these sessions that we have together is really to offer support, ideas, knowledge and wisdom to those in a role of those that are supporting the health and well-being of people working in health and care. We really want to share the range of well-being, the national range of well-being support activities, but also local ones too. And what we want to do is connect with each other and collectively build our community so that we can support ourselves, our colleagues and our staff so much better.
And on our agenda today, you've got myself and Zoe, who will be your facilitators. And then we will get a roundup of what's happening on the national offer from Dr. Sonia Wellbeing. And then we will hear from Dr. Nick Gray on the principles for psychological support and interventions. And we will also hear from Dr. Idit about supporting UK healthcare workers in the Ebola treatment centers in Sierra Leone. And we'll also hear about the Common Rooms offer from Alan Nobbs. And in the end, as usual, we will end by a call to action and some closing remarks from myself and Zoe. And on the team today, you've already met me and Zoe. We are your facilitators today. Our contributors today, we have Dr. Sonia, Dr. Nick, Dr. Idit, and Alan Nobbs. And on the social media, we've got Lee. Behind the scenes who are supporting this from a technical point of view, we've got Paul, Zara, and Tej. Our chat box facilitators are Cheryl and Louise today. And on the YouTube, we've got Ian and Helen. Thank you and welcome. So we'll begin by getting an update on the National Wellbeing Offer from Dr. Sonia Wellbank, who is our Health and Wellbeing Clinical Lead for NHS England and Improvement. And before you begin, Sonia, I know I say this all the time, but thank you to your team. The support you have out there supporting the NHS across board is just incredible. And we are all from the ground benefiting from all those initiatives you and your teams have put forward. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Sonia.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Coming at you today live from the People Team Central at Stratford-on-Avon. I'd just like to say the sun is so shining outside and my entire family are out sunbathing, which frankly is rude because I seem to be the only one in my home working today. Great to be here. Just wanted to take a few minutes to share with you the latest update and statistics that we're seeing come through on some of the main offers. So I've just checked the stats actually for today. We're up now over 2,400 calls to the Wellbeing helpline. And some of the themes I want to share with you today have also come in from some analysis that we're doing around the local employment assistance services as well. So nice to see similar themes because it's given us some confidence around, we feel like we know what's going on. Over 1,000 calls again on the text helpline, peak hours remain the same. Something about the evening time, people feeling comfortable to text, and in the daytime, people are calling. So interesting stat there. Self-help materials still continue to be really popular, and the webinars, these ones that we're putting on each week again, are attracting a huge amount of support every week, and then people downloading them as well beyond that event, which is great. So we think we're continuing to hit the spot there. We're just about to upload some EID guidance onto the website, again, just as a support offering. So look out for that. And we're doing a qualitative evaluation outline at the moment, looking for experiences and impact. So we've got a lot of quantitative data that we're collecting, but we want to go and just understand what's been really helpful about the services that we're offering and what people have made of them, which have been useful. And you'll see the NHS pulse check coming out, the temperature check, with some questions specifically about health and well-being. So again, looking forward to the data that's going to bring us in order to help us shape the offer. Interestingly, what we're learning, so anxiety and loneliness still continue to be talked about, and this is both locally and nationally. So again, would encourage you to be reaching out to people in terms of connecting them from a social perspective. You know, how are people feeling? How are we encouraging that kind of contact with each other? I know this week a colleague reminded me that they're used to being in an office, seeing lots of people on a day-to-day basis, and are actually really struggling. But it was only through a fortuitous conversation. So again, it's just reminded me to check in with my colleagues, make sure that people are okay. Concerns about domestic violence and suicidal thinking, again, are rising. So you'll see some resources on our website around bereavement support, particularly support of suicide. We're hoping to release in the next week or so some guidance around what psychological support you would want to be thinking about putting into place, and what the national offer for mental health support will equally look like. And certainly that suicidal thinking is one of the things that we're really paying attention to. I'll talk to you in a little while about the things that we can do as a local team to help, because I know that those practical solutions are really important. One of the new things that seems to be coming out is this reaction that people are having to the demands of a new role. It's almost like we've risen to the challenge, we've done what's expected of us. And now you want me to go back? well, I'm not sure about this. And it's that sort of delayed reaction of as we get back to, what did somebody call it, future state rather than BAU, which I think I like better, the future state, because we're not going to go back to whatever had gone before. Just to alert you, so we've got a free coaching offer coming up, which includes the how to respond under an emergency scenario. So just to draw your attention to that. We're continuing to work on the recovery pack. So we're going to be sending out an offer for people to join us in a quick design session around what are the specific elements we would want to cover in that. The King's College site that I talked to you about before, around how you assess your mental health, checking in on how you're feeling and signposting you to the next level. I'm just laughing at Naomi's comment. I hate acronyms. I know, slap me every time I use one. The Citizens Advice pilot's gone really well, so we're hoping to roll that offer out nationally. We're just talking to the team about how we do that right now. And the Relate offer, again, we're looking at putting that out nationally, recognising that there's a huge impact on both our teams and on the people that they live with as well. So we want to make sure that people are supported in the round. If we could bring up the next slide, thank you. So I just wanted to give you a reminder of what's to come. So for those of you that haven't seen this slide before, coming out of the active phase, we're going to have this first shockwave, which I think we're seeing really starting now. As the physical demands of the work subside, we can start to really hear about what impact this has had on me, not just my work impact, but my home impact. We're seeing lots of emotion, people really feeling the challenges of that work. So we're expecting with all of our offers to see a second kind of surge in people really wanting to seek support. We then know that as the system starts to recover, people will have possibly a negative response to that. You know, the flowers have stopped arriving. Somebody called it a community chest today, which I really like the idea of. All these offers people are putting aside from the community. Once that stops, what does work feel like? How do I readjust to that? And then through, as the demand starts to settle, those people that maybe need more than the support offer and will need mental health intervention, we'll be noticing them. So I just wanted to give you a couple of things to think about. So really, what does the best place to work look like? If we think about our context of the people plan, what does the best place to work look like during recovery? So this idea of setting up spaces that enable people to recover. And I mean, not just physical spaces, but open psychological spaces where people feel safe. And I know Alan's going to talk to us about the common rooms, but I'd really be encouraging you to think locally about how you do that. Using trauma-informed approaches. We've got some peer support training via the REACT training I've mentioned to you a couple of times from Neil Greenberg that will be coming out, really thinking about the safe way to help people process and debrief what they've been through. Buddying people up. So I've talked a number of times about suicide thinking, people feeling hopelessness, anxiety. The best way that you can support your staff is by keeping a close eye on each other. There is something about trauma symptoms laying very quietly for months and possibly years, and distress hitting us before we can verbalize what's happening. So I heard one of our ambulance workers talk yesterday about the day before he had a year off with a breakdown. He was telling everybody he was absolutely fine, and he genuinely believed he was absolutely fine. So there's something about us noticing in each other changes in our behaviour and noticing those signs of distress in others. And then there's something about giving people time. So recovery is very individual, and thinking about taking annual leave time, nudging people towards time off, ensuring that they have a space to reflect, and supporting people to come back and return to a space that gives them good work, good purpose in that work. And then final slide from me for today. So for those of you that don't know my clinical background, I've studied resilience and all things restorative for a number of years. And I just want to take you back to that space of thinking about resilience is not about the absence of symptoms, just hold on the upper lip, strength of character. It's about being able to display those emotions and working through them in a way that works for you. We are absolutely capable of amazing things. I think everybody has been astounded by how the NHS and social care has stepped up. And it's now time for you to take some time to really think about what the impact on you has been. I don't know about you, but for me, it's just been a period of intense activity, and knowing that that's going to have an impact on me. Seeking coaching, looking at supportive offers has been really an important way of me getting through this. Getting up, coming into work every day is the core of your resilience, but also knowing that if you push those negative emotions down, if all you do is, try to forget about them and move on, they will come back at a later point. So really trying to work through them with each other, seeking support is really important. And I think that's my last. No, it isn't. It's my plug. So Tribe, if you haven't yet experienced Tribe and you want a cool place to hang out, this is where it's happening, people. So come and register there to see the great resources that we've got. The People NHS UK website is being updated quicker than I could tell you what's happening. But again, lots of resources there. And we're constantly tweeting out from our People NHS or Sonia Wallbank Twitter code. So please join us, because it's really important that we get your views in the round. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sonia. A lot to think about there, particularly what will be the best place to work and look like in the future state. I'll take away that one with me and think about it. Thank you very much. Always useful to hear what's going on and the challenge you share through getting us to think about what we need to be considering for the future. I'll hand you over to Zoe now. Zoe, you do the poll for
thanks,
us?
Elizabeth, and thanks, Sonia. So we're going to do a quick poll before we get into our speakers today. We just want to find out a little bit of information from yourselves, really. So I'm going to ask for this poll to be set up for us, and we're really interested about what support resources have you called upon to look after your own health and well-being during these current times. So if you're in YouTube, then please do add to the chat box. And if you're with us in Zoom, then please do use the poll that you can see and the chat box as well. So let's see if those are coming in. We've got lots of people on at YouTube today, so welcome. Number one is existing family, social and community networks. 2, existing work and professional networks. 3, local organisational health and wellbeing support resources. 4 is regional, and 5 is national. And number 6 is other things to share in the chat box. So we can see those coming in. Excellent. And if we just pause that and share the results. So from this, we can see a lot of people are using existing family, social and community networks. I'm definitely using mine, and professional networks as well. So thank you for that. We'll analyse that in a moment, and we'll have a look at YouTube as well. So if we could stop sharing those, and then I've got another question for you to be answered in your respective chat boxes. So I'm so keen to hear about, of all the things that your employer, regional and national team have put together to support wellbeing, what are the top 3 things that you hope can stay? So please do use the chat box and let us know, what are the top 3 things that you hope can stay for the long term? So thanks, Nick. Nick's saying coaching. Rebecca's saying free access to the apps. And they're all coming in now. Collaborative working, we've got the apps. Working from home, apps are coming in quite a lot. Helen, I'm going to come to YouTube. What are people saying in YouTube?
So we're running a little bit behind on the YouTube. So could we can we hear a bit more from Zoom first while while our
sure.
YouTube colleagues are putting their ideas across, and just really encourage you know, the if you're on YouTube at the moment, and please you know, pop in the chat box and let us know you know, what you want to say.
Thank you. Louise, over to you. What's coming in the chat box?
They are coming in quick and fast. I caught, like you said, apps, check-ins, resilience and support team, flexibility, safe home working. Yeah, taking well-being seriously. That's come up a couple of times. Lots of flexible working and flexibility.
Mm-hmm. There's a few things that I've seen pop up as well. Trust and kindness as well. Interesting. Thank you for sharing. Helen.
Yeah, and we're coming in now in the YouTube chat box, and the things that we're seeing here is working from home and free access to the apps. More working from home and flexibility, being able to put our families first, and having wellbeing rooms for on-site staff as well. That's coming up as an issue. So again, if you're on YouTube, please keep your answers coming in thick and fast.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Louise. And during the next session, I'll be having a look through all of these and seeing what we can keep as well and how we can support you to do that. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Zoe. So we are now going to hear from Dr. Nick Gray, who is a consultant clinical psychologist and joint clinical lead for the psychology support program for COVID-19, and also Dr. Idit Albert, who is also a consultant clinical psychologist and joint clinical lead for the psychology support program for COVID-19. Welcome and thank you. Over to you, Nick and Idit.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Zoe, as well, for the invitation. Really pleased to be able to kind of offer up some of our thinking, really, around principles for psychological support and interventions for NHS staff. Next slide, please. And what we're going to see here is actually a snapshot of actually what's a larger document working its way through NHS EI and being kind of refined and finalised. And as this is a preview, we'd really welcome any feedback, any questions, and please do add those to the chat box. We'll have some opportunity to talk about them at the end, but also we'll be able to kind of pick up any comments kind of after the webinar as well. Really, the aim is to have a set of principles which are kind of agreed, provide an agreed framework. And we're well aware that in most areas now, there's quite an established local offer to NHS staff. And what we hope that these principles will add and provide is really kind of a benchmark that people can look at their local offers and tweak them if need to be as well. And we really want to ensure that all NHS staff who do require sort of formal psychological interventions really can access that swiftly and in a prioritised way. Next slide, please. The principles that I'm going to focus on here are taken from a variety of kind of guidance documents, including from the British Psychological Society, which is the ones on the right-hand side here, and would highly kind of recommend. And I've heard many times from people that it's unprecedented times, that these are very, very new circumstances. And while that's true, there is still kind of learning that we can take from kind of previous work, previous research, and that we need to take this to really kind of guide our principles. But the evidence-based practice isn't just the research, it's how we combine that together with kind of clinical expertise, but also the preferences of people using services, in this case, kind of NHS staff. Next slide, please. So we have here a kind of a sort of classic sort of pyramid of kind of like stepped care, that kind of basic needs kind of at the bottom. There's a variety of kind of different types of basic need in the bottom kind of grey block. That's not kind of comprehensive, of course. And then as we move up the kind of the pyramid, relatively smaller numbers of people will need to kind of access those kind of forms of support. So social support and psychosocial support, I'll say a little bit more about in just a moment. But those will kind of really overlap to some degree with kind of basic needs, whereas psychological interventions are actually kind of more specific and are offered by psychological practitioners. Next slide, please. What we already know from the evidence of the pandemic and COVID-19 is that sadly that staff from Black and minority ethnic communities will be disproportionately affected. And of course, it's likely, therefore, that such staff will have greater need for psychological support than others. But there's long-standing evidence that BAME staff are less likely to access this support. What this leads to really is a real kind of impetus for all of us, and for team leaders in particular, to prioritise checking in on the well-being of BAME staff and to kind of signpost to BAME specific mental health services kind of where appropriate and possible. I want to kind of highlight the document you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here. This is a kind of a positive practice guide that was developed for the improving access to psychological therapy services, but is really relevant to any service that's providing any form of kind of psychological support or psychological intervention. And there's really good ideas about how we can be better kind of culturally responsive and culturally adapt the kind of the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So as we kind of sort of move up the kind of the sort of pyramid of support, social support is applicable for us all kind of throughout all stages of kind of the pandemic. But one of the things that we know from research, particularly for healthcare staff, is that this is something that needs to be actively encouraged. It's not something that staff are necessarily brilliant at in terms of kind of just doing off their own back. And the kind of support we want to actively encourage is both the kind of personal social support, family and friends, the one that came up highest in the kind of the poll that we ran earlier, but also occupational social support. And this is a range of things that we can all do in our kind of services around clear communication, good leadership, giving people the opportunity to kind of catch up with each other kind of formally, but also having additional opportunities together. And again, for team leaders and staff to really pay particular attention to those who might be especially vulnerable for a variety of different reasons. Next slide, please. So as we kind of move up the pyramid, psychosocial support is again important at all stages of the kind of the pandemic, and that this is really about additional ways in which we can facilitate self-care, coping, problem solving in our NHS staff. In particular, this might be around kind of provision of information, information about typical emotional and psychological reactions, information on the types of wellbeing resources, such as the ones that Sonia's already kind of introduced and highlighted, but also information about how to kind of access kind of help. And this help will be coming from a variety of different sources. It may be kind of within the NHS, such as occupational health and employee assistance programs, but may also be kind of outside the NHS as well. And we know from the kind of the phone line that kind of relationship difficulties is one of the most common things that's kind of discussed. Within this psychosocial support, one of the principles should be that we're actively listening, but without the expectation that people should talk about their feelings. Yeah, it's not that we're wanting to force anybody to talk. And within the trauma literature, there's kind of a phrase that's been used in the past, which is around watchful waiting to see how things develop for people. One of the difficulties with that phrase is that services have sometimes had rather too much emphasis on the waiting rather than on the watchful. And there's a move now to really consider this to be more as active monitoring, that it's something that we need to check in with staff, but we don't just leave it there. We check in with them again. We see how things develop. And for those people who are improving, that's great. For those people who become more stuck in their recovery, then that's something that we can kind of then signpost them onto kind of further resources for. Next slide, please. And then at the top of the pyramid, there's the kind of the more sort of formal psychological interventions. And there are some things which we should make sure that actually we're not doing kind of for our NHS staff. We shouldn't be offering formal psychological debriefing. We know that this can impede people's recovery. Equally, we shouldn't be offering unproven psychological interventions. What we should be doing is thinking about, for particularly where there's kind of grief and losses, around kind of bereavement counselling, and that may be likely to be offered outside of the NHS. But for those people who have kind of persistent kind of difficulties, we should be thinking about offering evidence-based psychological therapies, particularly those that are kind of recommended kind of by NICE and with appropriately kind of qualified and trained practitioners. Most typically, it would be kind of within the improving access to psychological therapy services, the local services across England. It may also be in clinical health psychology services where those are available, and in secondary care mental health services, which will also be looking to offering services to NHS staff. Next slide, please. So final slide is really some kind of take-home messages. Is that first is that the expectation for most of us and for most people in the kind of pandemic is that there'll be a course of natural recovery, the resilience that Sonia kind of mentioned kind of earlier, and that this natural recovery can be really enhanced with kind of social support from family and friends, social support at work. That we shouldn't be rushing in to offer kind of psychological interventions, but that psychosocial support and psychological interventions when offered will need to be culturally adapted and to be kind of culturally responsive. But that when persistent psychological difficulties are there, what we want to ensure is that actually people are offered the effective therapies that exist, and that these should be from an appropriately qualified and registered practitioner, and that they're getting the appropriate supervision for that as well. So that was really all that I wanted to highlight for people, to highlight the documents that were in the slides. Please do add kind of comments to the chat box. As I said, that these principles are yet to be fully finalised and kind of disseminated, but that we kind of will certainly take on board any kind of signposting or comments or questions that you put. What I'd like to do now is hand over to my colleague Idit, who's going to tell us about some of the lessons that can be learned from the kind of Ebola crisis.
So, Idit, you're just on mute at the moment. There you are.
Yes, apology. It took me time to find the unmute button. Thanks, Nick. Yes, so as Nick said, principles of psychological care, which evidence-based practice, and what do we do in an unprecedented situation and crisis? And the Ebola crisis was an unprecedented crisis. And the Ebola Psychological Support Service is a good example for what we did in that sort of situation. So if people remember, in 2014 and 2015, there was the crisis in West Africa. There were 28,000 cases of Ebola, and 11,000 people lost their lives. We were here in South London and Maudsley, so we weren't in Sierra Leone at the time, but we were then contacted with requests for support to our colleagues, our partner university, who actually established an Ebola treatment center in Freetown in Sierra Leone, and were struggling with the level of disease and death. And we wondered what to do, so we put a call out to psychology and psychotherapists, and we had many volunteers from our trust. So we knew who would do it, we knew what we're going to do, we knew about the psychosocial level of support we needed to offer, but there was a question of how we were going to do that. So we got together, we had a workshop, and we worked out what we were going to do, and we could go probably for the next slide for this one. Initially, as I said, this was voluntary for our colleagues in King's, but a month later, DFID decided to send 200 UK medics, NHS medics, to Sierra Leone to the 6 treatment centres, and asked us to extend the offer to them, and provided us with a bit of support to do that. That allowed us also the opportunity to meet with some, or at least talk with some of the healthcare workers that went to Sierra Leone before their deployment. So what we offered was ongoing psychosocial support. We offered it over the telephone and over Skype. It consisted of active listening, normalizing reactions to distress, very much encouraging staff to look after themselves, in terms of their shifts, the length of the shifts, take break, drink, eat, rest, switch off when they were not working. So we often scheduled our meeting with them on the times that they were not working, and made sure that we're talking from a nice cafe, and checked on the type of smoothie that they were drinking during the conversation. We engaged in problem solving, and we continued with the offer of psychosocial support when people returned from their deployment, which was very important. And as I said, the psychologists and psychotherapists were volunteers, but they had NHS governance, we had peer supervisions, and they're all employed by South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. With the support that we had from DFID, that was quite helpful, because we were able to then extend the support and develop a program to support the Sierra Leonean health workers. And that was quite a big project with 4 phases that started after the Ebola treatment centers closed. But I won't focus on this now, because I think for our discussion, what's more interested is the support for the NHS UK medics. I think we could go to the next slide, please. So what did we learn from the experience of providing the psychological support service during the Ebola crisis? We learned that healthcare professionals, healthcare workers really valued their work. They all said when they returned, when we interviewed them, they would have done it again. They would have repeated the experience. We gave them a post-trauma growth questionnaire, and 45% had positive responses on that one. But we also learned that the work in the Ebola treatment centers did have an impact on them. 62% had clinical symptoms. They reported clinical symptoms, particularly there was a higher level of alcohol use, 30%, and slightly higher level of PTSD, 7%. Only a small proportion, and that was 17%, had more significant difficulties. So they talked about, they had difficulties in multiple areas, and really were engaged with the occupational health in regards to how they were coping at work. We can go on to the next slide, please. So what were the challenges? And I have to say that actually what's interesting, before we go into the challenges during deployment, that in the interviews, people said that they found the return to the UK and the return to working in the NHS more challenging than the work that they did and the experiences during their deployment. But the challenges that they experienced during the deployment, people wouldn't be surprised that 91% were talking about exposure to the scenes of kind of the Ebola, the death, the disease. And we did a qualitative study on this, and some of the quotes I'll be using here to just kind of illustrate what kind of the experiences that people had. So in terms of the exposure to trauma, this is a quote of somebody who said, "We had piles and piles of rotting bodies and nowhere to put them. There were times it felt like the whole world was going to die." The other issue that was very traumatic for people was the death of children. Children that were younger than 5 years old didn't survive Ebola. Most of them didn't survive. And that was something that was very difficult for UK health professionals, health workers who were not really used to that from their work in our hospitals. We could go on to the next slide, please. From our discussions in the webinars, people wouldn't be surprised that many people talked about challenges during the deployment which were associated with organizational issues, team issues, difficulties with leaders, difficulties with team relations, politics, problems with resources. Particularly, people were kind of holding in mind the comparison between what they were used to from our NHS hospitals in comparison to the treatment centre. Long hours, the exhaustion that people felt, moral and ethical dilemmas. And again, very much kind of what people were holding in mind is this idea that some of the patients that they couldn't save, they felt that they would have been able to save them if they were in hospitals here in the UK. And other issues were perceived lack of job control, poor job definitions, difficulties with communications across the organizations and agencies. The treatment centres included teams from NGOs as well as medics, as I said, from the UK. and some experience sense of helplessness and the futility of the work. We can probably go on to the next slide, please. People wouldn't be surprised that there was one of the challenges was the fear of Ebola. One thing was other people avoiding them, particularly when they were coming back to the UK around Christmas to visit family and friends, and they felt that people were avoiding them. A quote on this was, a lot of people, instead of saying that they don't want to see me, they felt like they were ignoring me, just didn't answer my calls. There was quite a lot of this stuff going on at the time. And there was the fear of getting Ebola. It's harder to cannulate somebody with 3 pairs of gloves on when your peripheral vision is rubbish because you're wearing goggles and all the restrictions you have, especially with dehydrated patients. My biggest worry was getting a needle stick injury when I was cannulating. Okay, the next slide, please. So post-deployment, when people were back in the UK, as I said, this was something that people found particularly challenging. Can we go back in the slide? They found it particularly challenging. And the challenges that people had was that people experienced guilt, self-doubts, adjusting to work in the NHS, in hospitals and with our patients. Some felt that the patients were too entitled. Some were getting more irritable with patients and with managers in the NHS, and some people were reporting sleep difficulties. Nick mentioned that kind of social support and team support. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that people reported that the team support was the most helpful thing that they've experienced. They felt that their team were there for them. They could come back from a shift and there'll always be people to talk to. They could talk with them about personal difficulties. People also reported organisational support, but more particularly around practical things. But interestingly, unlike kind of what our Paul was telling us about how we are all using our families and our friends, with the healthcare workers that went to Sierra Leone, they actually felt that they were not able to utilise the support from the family. They felt that they needed to protect their families from their experiences. One quote that I remember kind of quite vividly was somebody saying, I was worried that every time I talk to my parents, I'll cry and they'll cry. So that was, they weren't able to use the family as much. The next slide, please. So the feedback on the program was that the healthcare workers found the support from the psychologists and psychotherapists very helpful. And even the ones that didn't utilize it said that they felt comforted knowing that it existed. A quote was, it's an important service, one that really should be mandatory for anyone deployed for an emergency like an Ebola break, where there's just a lot of human suffering that you're dealing with. And some people process it better just by talking to someone just a little bit more disconnected, who might have a little bit more of a kind of objective perspective. But 67% of the people we talked to didn't use the service. And I think from what we're hearing here, it probably was a similar situation. One person said, I think it was, I wasn't really acknowledging to myself at that moment how strong I was. It was too much. I was in survival mode, just getting on, pushing on and making the most of it. I didn't think that contacting the psychologist would have occurred to me at that point. Another interesting feedback was, which kind of recently we've been hearing and we know about it also from the military, is that healthcare workers said that they would have valued support to their families during their deployment. The next slide, please. So really what we're kind of the key message is from the Ebola Psychological Support Service in this kind of presentation is that it illustrates that evidence-based practice care could be offered in unprecedented circumstances and times by qualified and supervised practitioners, and adaptations really need to be made to how we deliver services so that they meet the needs of service users and adjust to the circumstances. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Very much. There are lots to take on. I'm struck by some of the similarities of those experiences to what we are experiencing here on the ground. But thank you very much. Lots to take on there. I'm now going to hand over to Alan, who is going to share with us the Common Room offer. Alan is the Head of Design and Development, COVID-19 Workforce Health and Wellbeing, part of the support team. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much indeed, Elizabeth, and thanks to Nick and Idit as well for their input. I've been struck as I've been listening and in previous weeks' webinars that we've shared a lot of thinking and learning from experts and resources and different contexts around the world, and it's been enlightening to see some of that informing the work. But it strikes me that, for me at least, it's been a real privilege these past couple of months to work with Sonia and her whole team of people on not just talking about what we're learning from the evidence and looking externally at the evidence and building guidelines and principles by which we might practice, but actually simultaneously doing that through the development of the health and wellbeing offer. And I've got one very small part to play in that with colleagues, and that's been the idea of developing staff common rooms, which, you know, to me, as I've been listening, really speak to the principles that we've been talking about. I guess at the very heart of the offer as a whole, and as common rooms, it very much is recognising that right now what people need most are psychologically safe, psychologically informed spaces to help them maintain their health and their well-being, and to help them in maintaining their own natural recovery processes, be that in the immediacy of COVID right now and what's going on for people, but also in the longer term as they readjust to having to think about re-entering future state and all of those kinds of things that we've talked about. And I think it's just one of a range of very complementary offers which can perhaps speak to some of the issues that have started to emerge. Because whilst a lot of our conversations have been around frontline staff and their traumas and how they connect with their teams and get their professional support and so on, I was struck by the comments about an increased sense of isolation and disconnect socially. And for many of us, of course, we are experiencing our own COVID crisis and context experience, not at the front line, but you know, trapped, shall I say, in our own homes and our gardens and our towns and cities. And the common room offer is something that I think speaks to the whole raft of our NHS workforce. It's basically based upon the principles of supporting people to naturally heal, whilst guided by notions of psychological first aid and trauma-informed care. So how do we help people connect with peers, people that look, feel, sound like me, are sharing similar experiences like me right now? And how do we hold them in a space that allows them just to explore that, to normalize some of that, and develop some of those resilience strategies and that resilience awareness that they might need to continue? And it's a space that you might choose to go to if you're working in a brand new virtual team and you've not quite developed those relationships, but feel a need to be able to talk about your issues and challenges. It might be a team you need to go to if you're thrust into a frontline environment that's unfamiliar to you. So it's just a different space that provides some of that. These are small spaces, they're about an hour long, and they provide for up to 10 people just to come together, as you see on the screen, connect, share, slow down, and reflect on their own purpose and their own well-being. And they're being really expertly hosted and held using colleagues from our clinical psychology community, who are well versed in interventional therapies, but I think are expert at holding that boundary between not moving into intervention and therapeutic mode, but holding that boundary of keeping this in the space of natural healing. So we've been running these for 2 or 3 weeks, and our uptake is slowly increasing. You can join them through a couple of routes, either directly through to our partner's website at Practitioner Health, or through the people.nhs.uk website that you can see on the left of the screen there if you go through that route. If I can just go to the next slide, I think we are delighted to be able to be working in partnership with NHS Practitioner Health, who, ashamedly I'd not heard of previously, but are a fabulous organisation that was born out of a recognised need for qualified medical staff to have routes through to explore their own anxieties, challenges and issues, and to get support, advice, guidance and intervention where possible. So we're really partnering with Practitioner Health to say, what can we learn from your approach in the medical sphere? And how might we broaden that out into developing common room principles for all staff? And we've gone above and beyond that now, and we've got more to do. But what you see here, if you clicked through onto the Practitioner Health website calendar, here's just a snapshot of things that are available today, right now. So you see our staff common room for all colleagues at the top. We're running with some ambulance-specific common rooms that you see a third of the way down. You see some medical student-specific work, but also just spaces where all of us as staff can gather and maybe enter into some mindfulness and so on. So there's a whole range of offers in this virtual space of providing that safety and that security of just being able to explore and normalise what's going on for us right now. And I just wanted to share that and, you know, to encourage people who might be thinking, do I need a safe space in which to talk about this that I don't have elsewhere, that I can't find elsewhere? What might this range of offers do? And who do I know that's struggling to find connection? And could I point them in the direction of this? So it's both an offer and a comms and marketing piece, but also just a real small, but I think tangible example of how we're learning from what other people have done in other sectors and around the world. And we're building that into our own thinking whilst working to our principles and guidance as well. So I just wanted a quick and brief opportunity to do that for colleagues here and now. But I'm conscious that, you know, we've got a large psychology, LNOD community in train with us right now. And there'll be lots of questions building up in the chat room, particularly I think for Nick and Idit at this point in time about what we've heard and what that means for us. So without further ado, I'm going to come to my Zoom chat hosts first of all, Louise and who else do I have? Well, I'll come to Louise anyway. Louise and Cheryl, absolutely, Louise and Cheryl. And then I'll come to Helen and Ian in due course to pick up any questions from YouTube. So Cheryl, Louise, what's cropping up thematically in the chat box that might be helpful for Nick and or Idit to explore?
You want to go first, Cheryl?
I was just about to ask you.
Let's not be shy. Cheryl.
So I think that there's been lots of discussion that's going on in the chat rooms. I think that people are really appreciating the evidence base that's actually coming up, and the things that Idit has shared, I think has particularly resonated with people. I think people are starting to wonder about the whole supports and things from family and how you recreate that somewhat. I think in terms of it, I think it's probably, there's quite a few questions around the traumatic growth bit, so I don't know if either of them are able to comment on that.
So let's go over to Nick and or Idit. So there's been a lot of conversation I've seen about this notion that actually, for many of us, we will experience growth through this in inverted commas traumatic phase as opposed to suffering ill health. So what's your thinking and where's your reading and learning in this space so far? Can I maybe come to yourself, Nick?
Yeah, and I've just seen another comment come through as well from Sonia, so I'll say something about post-traumatic growth, and I'll say something a bit about debriefing as well. So I know that's come up as a theme both on Zoom and on YouTube. So in terms of kind of post-traumatic growth, and this is well established now, situation where, having been through traumatic experiences, that it may kind of deepen our appreciation of life, of relationships, of a variety of things. But post-traumatic growth is specifically actually talking about those people who develop PTSD, that they can grow from that experience of having PTSD, not simply from having been through traumatic experiences. However, there are a number of books that I would recommend. Stephen Joseph, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger, I think is probably the sort of entry book that I'd recommend. And one of the things that we're hoping to do, of course, is to encourage kind of learning, is to encourage kind of growth when kind of working with people. we shouldn't kind of assume that that's going to be the natural course of things. For many people, there'll be a kind of an increase in symptoms, difficulties, and then there'll be a natural recovery without necessarily kind of massively increased growth. They'll just kind of engage and reclaim their life and reclaim the life that they had, rather than it completely changing the way in which they're engaging with life. I do want to say about the debriefing, that when I was saying about do not offer psychological debriefing, this is based on best evidence. And by psychological debriefing, really what I'm wanting to highlight is where we're deliberately asking people to describe in great detail the events that they've experienced very soon afterwards, and not just in any old detail, but in emotional detail, to be guiding people to talk about their emotions and really encouraging them to talk about their emotions. One of the things that we know is that people have different kind of coping mechanisms, different recovery kind of mechanisms, and we need to give at least a little bit of time for those to be used, the things that we know or have found have worked for us kind of previously. If we intervene too early, if in the first kind of days or weeks kind of following a kind of a life-threatening event or witnessing life-threatening event, we're deliberately asking people to recount emotionally these experiences, there is a danger that that will kind of actually be more likely to lead to kind of post-traumatic stress disorder in particular. And certainly there's not good, clear evidence that it's going to do any good. So in these circumstances, given that most of the evidence is suggesting that, well, at best, it makes no difference, but at worst, it could be harmful, it's not something that we should be offering. This is not the same as operationally debriefing at the end of a shift and talking through kind of, what happened, what did we do in that situation, what could we have done differently, that we might do with colleagues, and having that opportunity at the end of a shift, end of a work day, to talk with people about what's happened, and if we wish to, about how we feel, then that's a great opportunity to have. But it needs to be an opportunity rather than a kind of an imposition that you should talk emotionally.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Nick. Just conscious of time, and also conscious that we've got colleagues on YouTube as well. I wonder, Helen, Ian, any kind of burning thematic questions from YouTube participants, and maybe Idit can explore her thoughts on them.
Yeah, hi, it's Helen here. So it's interesting because I've looked at both chat boxes, and it's like two parallel universes on Zoom and YouTube, and actually very similar kinds of themes. So I just wanted to pick up a theme, and Hilton and Janine on YouTube have got a bit of a kind of question or theme going, and it's about safety. And I think this ties in with our session last week, from Amy Edmondson, when we talked about psychological safety. So, when we talk about safe spaces, what makes a space safe, and how do we make it safe for people? And also we talked about safe paces as well. So we talked about safe paces and safe spaces. So what makes a pace or a space safe?
Yeah, Idit, what makes a safe space and a safe pace?
Not an easy question, Alan.
Sorry.
No, but I think it'd be an interesting discussion. I don't know where the evidence is about safe spaces and paces, except for what Nick said about kind of the natural recovery. But I can say from a clinical experience, it's a very individual issue. So you can work with somebody and you might think, well, they might not be safe necessarily. So, for example, in the case of sometimes when we're working with people who their immigration status in this country is not clear, but they've been traumatized by experiences in their country, and we know they might be sent back, but they still might feel safe enough to work on their traumas. So it's an issue about having a conversation with the individual about and hearing whether they feel safe, and how can we make them feel a bit safer? How can they make them feel a bit safer so that they can have a conversation? I think clinically it is an individual experience. I think there's some things that are very obvious. So if if somebody is really in the middle of an attack or immense risk, then clearly the situation isn't safe. But some of the situation, as we are sort of now, are a little bit grayer. But that's my take on it. Other people may have other ideas.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Idit. So there are some principles around psychological safety and the pace of the work, but it's both a contract and an organic process that needs to develop between and within the relationships, is what I think I heard you say in that space to some degree. Just really conscious of time. A couple of questions in the box about common rooms. So the common room offer is available to all NH staff, clinical and non-clinical, at every level and in every context. So with regard to the comment about is that so, and what might be the barriers, I will follow that up. I think it was a lady called Fiona, because I think there's some helpful insights into would a non-clinical practitioner readily think to go to a practitioner health website. So I think lots of food for thought. And for the colleague who wondered if I would send them some brief to put into their Southwest update around health and wellbeing, I'd be delighted to be emailed afterwards, or Twitter, just direct message me at Alan Nobbs, and I'd love to share some war of words around you and that. Just very conscious of time now, and there's a little bit for my host colleagues to do. Nick and Idit, in that order, if you could recommend one thing as a key takeaway, or a key thing that you think people should go away and think about or become more active around right now, what might that be? Nick?
Ooh. I'll give you two things, one of which is stay connected, particularly friends and family, and encourage your colleagues to do so. Second thing is, I think it really is important that all kind of team leaders are particularly asking around the well-being of Black and minority ethnic staff.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nick. And Idit?
We mentioned at the beginning that there are many psychologists on this webinar, so I would just encourage psychologists, keep to the principles of evidence-based, but be creative in how you're delivering support that suits your colleagues and the situation and circumstances in which you are in.
Fabulous. And actually, it seems fitting. Louise, one of our chat room hosts on Zoom, wondered if there was a chance for just one last question to be aired. And I think, given what I understand about this, it would be worthy of airing. Louise, what's the focus of the question or the points that are being raised that you thought important at this point?
Thanks, Alan. Yes, there were a few questions that came through, but Boomy in particular was asking about what sort of BAME-specific psychological services are out there to refer people to. We heard that in a comment earlier. And Fee was also asking if there are any intentions for culturally inclusive specific common rooms, or BAME common rooms specifically. Thank you.
Fabulous. And I think that's a very appropriate place to end. Absolutely. I think Sonia responded about the wider work that's being done around a BAME specific psychological intervention and other support resources that are currently being worked through. But Cheryl, your counterpart chat room host this evening, is very kindly helping me navigate how we might really purposefully and intentionally develop culturally sensitive and culturally diverse common rooms, recognizing the specific different cultural contexts that make it more or less easy for different communities to come to those. So that work is absolutely in train and is at the forefront of my common room focused mind right now. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks everybody for listening. And I think I hand back over to Zoe and Elizabeth now, who've got no time at all to do the 5 minutes worth of closing. Apologies, colleagues.
No problem at all. It is all really, really interesting, and I just wish I could stay here for another half an hour as well. But I'd like to just say thanks ever so much, Alan, Idit and Nick. Very, very helpful, and we'll continue the conversation on the Tribe platform as well. And I'd ask if those links could be put in the YouTube and the Zoom link. So just a couple of things to finish. We're not going to run a poll, but please do let us know in the chat boxes to what extent is today's session being useful in your own role in supporting your health and well-being of your staff. So please do add those to the chat box. And I'd also invite you to think about what's your next step? Is there something else that you would like to do following today's session? So please keep them all coming in. We will read every single one of them that comes into YouTube and onto Zoom. And without further ado, we've got a couple more sessions planned for you. So the next session is all going to be all about the Wellbeing Support Offers. So if you'd like to know more about the Wellbeing Support Offers, please do tune in next week to hear about more detail of all of those. The week after, we're going to be talking about working parents. The week after that, we're going to be looking at leadership and supporting our leaders, and we're also going to have some sessions on spiritual leadership and you know, what else we can do to help one another. If you've got any other ideas of what you'd like to be discussed, then please do add those to the chat box. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on another session.